On today's episode of Vegas Hockey Hub, here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media, we're going to be going over a topic that has been long overdue on this channel. And based off of recent events, there is a reason why this video is being made, as we are going to be going over the history of the professional tryout with the Vegas Golden Knights organization, and talking about the guy that has recently been a PTO with the Vegas Golden Knights. Going to be going over all of that on this episode. And it's going to be really fun going over not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, not six, but officially 7 players that have been on PTOs with the Vegas Golden Knights throughout their franchise history. And then towards the end of the video, we will go more in detail on the latest PTO the Vegas Golden Knights have had and why I believe Tanner Pearson will be a great fit for the Vegas Golden Knights, why he is going to be the best PTO in Vegas Golden Knights history. So we're going to cover all of that on this episode of Vegas Hockey Hub. Now, if you want to go to our website, www.vegashockeyhub.com, we also have our social media pages at Vegas Hockey Hub. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and all major platforms. And if you want to follow your host, I am also on all social media platforms at Ian J. Rachiele. So this is going to be a really fun episode, and I just really want to come in real quick and do the history of the professional tryout when it comes to the Vegas Golden Knights and the PTO of the Vegas Golden Knights here on PR Connections Radio. Now, to start this correctly and to really get into the PTO history, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. Because when the Vegas Golden Knights are being created, they're being established, you need to add players. And more importantly, you need to bring on as many assets as you can. So with the Vegas Golden Knights entering year 1, they would not have only just one PTO player, not just 2 PTO players, but they would have 3 PTO players in their first ever season when it comes to an NHL franchise and the Vegas Golden Knights organization. And the first one, and I'm going to be covering here, is Bryce Gervais. Now, Bryce Gervais, who was 25 years old at the time of being signed to a PTO, he actually had some interesting background heading into it. Because the 2 years previously, he had been part of the Chicago Wolves, who were with the St. Louis Blues at that time. And in 78 games playing in the AHL with the Chicago Wolves, thank you to Hockey Reference for the information, he would have 17 goals and 27 points with the Chicago Wolves. And he actually skated up and suited up with the Chicago Wolves organization in the 2017 Calder Cup playoffs, entering that 2017-2018 season. So Vegas Golden Knights, they have Bryce Gervais on a PTO, and he would not make the main roster. Instead, the Vegas Golden Knights would take Bryce Gervais and would put him in the AHL and the Chicago Wolves. And in that one season that he would play for the Chicago Wolves organization, he would have just 5 points in his one and only season playing for the Vegas Golden Knights organization. And he actually would suit up in the Calder Cup playoffs, where the Vegas Golden Knights and the Chicago Wolves would lose in the second round. He would have 0 points in the Calder Cup playoffs, and his tenure with the Vegas Golden Knights organization would end after just that 1 year. So essentially, after 37 games with the Golden Knights organization, his career would end on this note. He would go and play one more season in North America, playing for the Minnesota Wild organization, as they would have the Iowa AHL team and the Iowa ECHL team. And after that one season of playing out there, he would then go to Denmark, he would go to Germany, and would go to Norway, playing out there in Europe before retiring and hasn't played a single game since the 2022-2023 season. So Bryce Gervais, who, like I said, at 25 years old when the Golden Knights picked him up for his one and only season with the Golden Knights organization, his career ended at the age of 30 years old after his final season playing in Norway. So that is what happened with Bryce Gervais, who was the first player on that PTO from the first season the Vegas Golden Knights were around. So I would say that when it comes to a professional tryout, Bryce Gervais was an example of they gave him a chance. They wanted to see what he could do. 25-year-old forward. He would then go down to the AHL, and after one season of just 5 points for the Golden Knights organization out there in the AHL, they would move on from him. He would have a short stop with another team in the NHL before making his rounds out there in Europe, playing professional hockey for 4 seasons before announcing his retirement. So that is what happened to the first player on this list in Bryce Gervais. Now, the next player is actually kind of interesting because it is a guy named Scooter Vaughn. And this was a 28-year-old at the time, and he had actually spent a few seasons playing in the ECHL, a few seasons playing in the AHL, but he was a guy that would rack up a decent amount of penalty minutes. He didn't score a lot of goals. I think the most goals that he had heading into this was 6 in about 60 or so games in the AHL. But this is somebody who was originally a defenseman who was converted into a forward. He had a really good college career playing out there at University of Michigan. In fact, there was a photo of him playing at essentially the version of the Winter Classic for college hockey that Michigan had back in 2010. And it's kind of cool to see, Scooter Vaughn was a defenseman converted into a forward, but he had spent time playing for Bridgeport, which was the affiliate of the New York Islanders. He spent 2 seasons with Chicago Wolves when they were with the St. Louis Blues organization, but he gets signed to a PTO. He goes to training camp for the Vegas Golden Knights. He does not make the main roster, but what he does is that he eventually goes back to Chicago and he plays a decent amount of games in the AHL for the Chicago Wolves in that one and only season he would play with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. And this is from Hockey DB. He would have in 49 games that year for the Chicago Wolves, 2 goals, 10 points, and he would rack up around 30 penalty minutes with the Chicago Wolves. Now, the unfortunate part of this story with Scooter Vaughn is that he unfortunately would not play in the AHL after this season. He wouldn't get brought back to the Vegas Golden Knights. And as a matter of fact, this 2017-2018 season with the Chicago Wolves would be his final season playing professional hockey anywhere. As after that 2017-2018 season, he would not step on the ice and play professional hockey anywhere else. So unlike Bryce Gervais, who after leaving Vegas, he spent about 5 seasons going around from team to team and going, over to Europe and stuff like that. Scooter Vaughn, at 28 years old, essentially retired and didn't play any other professional hockey after his 1 year being with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. So overall, this is just a type of situation where they gave him a chance. They brought him on a PTO. He was part of training camp. And then he plays his 1 season being in the AHL. He was on the playoff roster when they lost in the second round, the 2018 Calder Cup playoffs. And then that is it for him. So, 2 down, and we got a few more to go. But overall, so far, Bryce Gervais, he spent 1 year at the Golden Knights organization, then he moved on. And then Scooter Vaughn spent 1 year with the Golden Knights organization, and then his career was essentially done after that. And the last guy on here when it came to the PTO from season 1 with the Vegas Golden Knights organization is a defenseman in Kenny Morrison. And when it comes to Kenny Morrison, this was someone 25 years old. You know, he was going to try to earn his opportunity, earn his chance with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. Now, leading up to this, he had spent the last 3 seasons playing in the AHL with the Calgary Flames organization out there with the Stockton Heat. So with the Stockton Heat, he spent a few seasons there, and then he signs his PTO. He goes to camp in 2017, 2018, and he does not earn a main roster spot with the Vegas Golden Knights. But unlike Gervais and Vaughn, he actually split time between the AHL and the ECHL, as he would play a few games with the Quad City Mallards. By the way, to any Vegas Golden Knights fan, hey, remember that? Remember when our ECHL team for the first season was the Quad City Mallards? Man, that was fun times. And then the AHL with the Chicago Wolves. Now, I appreciate Elite Prospects for giving us this information, but he played in just 10 games with the Chicago Wolves, did not register a single goal, but had 3 points with his tenure in Chicago. And then with the Quad City Mallards, he ended up having 8 games with them and 2 goals. So in the ECHL, he did reasonably with them. But after his 2017-2018 run with the Vegas Golden Knights would be a one-and-done situation. But unlike the other two, he is still playing today. As after leaving the Vegas Golden Knights organization, he would make stops in Norway, Slovakia, Germany. He would go over and play in a bunch of different leagues out there in Europe, put up reasonable stats, by the way, in these seasons. But as of this current recording, he is playing in a senior hockey league in Saskatchewan. So in Saskatchewan, he's playing in a senior hockey league out there with the Paradise Hill Hawks out there in the SASHL. So, you know what? I will say this, 32 years old. He's still playing hockey. You know, this is something that, you know, he definitely has a passion for. Otherwise, why would you still be playing it? And you know what? As much as people want to say, oh, it's a senior hockey league. I mean, come on, it's a senior hockey league. You're still playing hockey. You're still playing the sport that you've loved since you were a little kid. And that is really what matters there. So at 32 years old, defenseman Kenny Morrison, he was a one and done with the Golden Knights organization, but he has bounced around Europe and now has found a still active tenure out there in Saskatchewan, out there in Canada, playing senior hockey. So overall, when it came to the PTOs for the first ever edition with the Vegas Golden Knights, Bryce Gervais, he spent 1 season in the AHL and then was moved around the AHL and a bunch of European leagues before finally calling it quits at the end of 22-23. The second one was forward Scooter Vaughn. He went with the Chicago Wolves. He put up, you know, some decent numbers with them and then retired and didn't play any professional hockey after his one and done with the Vegas Golden Knights. And then Kenny Morrison, still a active player, still playing hockey out there, is currently in Saskatchewan playing senior hockey out there. So, you know, overall, when it came to the first round of the PTOs, a professional tryout with the Vegas Golden Knights, they did not have to cut any of these guys completely. It's not like they didn't play for the Golden Knights organization at all. At least they played in the AHL and for somewhat the ECHL for one of them, and they got some minutes from them in the minor leagues. They were roster spots that were being able to be filled in the minor leagues. So overall, when it comes to a PTO, this is a plus for them. And with it being the first ever season the Vegas Golden Knights were around, it did help them add some more roster spots, regardless if it was the ECHL or AHL, able to help them add some more spots on the roster out there in the minor leagues. So I consider a success there. Now, when it gets to the PTOs for the Vegas Golden Knights, we would have to fast forward 4 more seasons before we get to our next PTO. So in 2018, 2019, none. 2019-2020, none. 2020-2021, none. And in 2021-2022, none. So for the Vegas Golden Knights, it was kind of interesting how they signed 3 PTOs in the first season of being a franchise, and then the following 4 seasons, 0. But in the 22-23 season, the Vegas Golden Knights would add somebody and sign them into a professional tryout on a PTO, and we'll talk about him in just a second. Now, entering the 2022-2023 season, the Vegas Golden Knights, they would sign defenseman Will Rydell to a PTO. And this was a situation where entering training camp, going into the preseason for the Vegas Golden Knights organization, this is, they missed the playoffs the year before, and they were bringing in this 25-year-old who had really came from the Ohio State University out there playing college hockey. Now, he had been on an amateur tryout agreement with the AHL's Lehigh Valley Phantom, which is part of the Philadelphia Flyers organization. But this was essentially his second tryout agreement. The first one, like I said, in the last few games of 21-22 with the Philadelphia Flyers organization. And the Vegas Golden Knights would give him a try. He would be part of the organization. He would be there during the preseason. And then towards the end, they would bring him into the organization, but they would send him down to the ECHL. And funny enough, he would be part of the original roster for the Savannah Ghost Pirates. So the Savannah Ghost Pirates, in their inaugural 22-23 season, when they were the ECHL affiliate of our Vegas Golden Knights organization, he was part of their first ever roster out there in Savannah, Georgia. But the story of Will Rydell has kind of been an interesting one. Now, I will say I do give credit to Hockey Reference for the data here. Now, Will Rydell would end up only playing 15 games for the Vegas Golden Knights organization, wouldn't even last a full season, as after playing 15 games and racking up only 4 assists, he would be sent over on a loan to the San Jose Barracuda, who are the affiliate of the San Jose Sharks. And he would be in the AHL for the remainder of the season and would play for San Jose for the remainder of 22-23. And once again, I always give credit to my sources. In 32 games for the Barracuda, Will Rydell would end up having 2 goals, 5 points, but would rack up almost 50 penalty minutes for San Jose. Now, after that tenure, this would be the 3rd NHL team that he would be part of an organization, Philadelphia, Vegas, and then San Antonio. After that season, he would move on over to the Calgary Flames organization for the 2023-2024 season, and he would split time between the AHL and the ECHL, Rapid City and Calgary. And in that season, Will Rydell would actually put up some reasonable numbers. He would have 8 goals and would have 22 points in 48 games between the AHL and the ECHL. So overall, that's not bad for a defenseman who is 27 years old, like Will Rydell. And now, at his age 28 season, he is on his 5th organization, but back with a familiar face. As entering the 24-25 season, defenseman Will Rydell would be with the Florida Panthers organization and would be back in the ECHL with the Savannah Ghost Pirates. So, kind of funny how that works. The Vegas Golden Knights signed Will Rydell to a professional tryout agreement. He ends up being with the Savannah Ghost Pirates' inaugural roster in 22-23. Fast forward 2 seasons later, he goes with the Florida Panthers organization and their ECHL affiliate, the Savannah Ghost Pirates. So even though he only spent half a season playing for the Vegas Golden Knights, at least he got signed after that PTO and he ended up being with the Golden Knights for at least 15 games in the ECHL. So for Will Rydell, that's really the story there. And, you've had 4 PTOs at this point, and none of them have played an NHL game for the Vegas Golden Knights. They've all been either in the AHL or the ECHL. But the next one actually was supposed to be on the NHL roster until the final set of roster cuts. And interesting enough, this guy, and we talked about it here on Vegas Hockey Hub about a year ago, this was someone that a lot of people thought could have been a diamond in the rough for the Vegas Golden Knights, and someone who could be what Tanner Pearson, they're hoping, will be long-term for the Vegas Golden Knights. And we'll talk about who that is and who the 5th PTO of the Vegas Golden Knights was in just a second here on Vegas Hockey Hub. Now, about a year ago, the Vegas Golden Knights had brought in a former second-round pick and a guy that there was some hype going into this PTO, and that was former Anaheim Duck Maxime Comtois. And this was a player who had been with the Anaheim Ducks organization. He had spent multiple years in the NHL playing for Anaheim, and even started playing in the NHL at the age of 19 years old out there in Anaheim. So this was a big deal. Like, this wasn't like the other 4 guys that I mentioned who had just been in the AHL. They had just been in the ECHL. These weren't guys that, were trying to make it to the NHL. No. Maxime Comtois was already an NHLer. I mean, this was somebody, and once again, I do appreciate Hockey DB for the information, but he had already been 5 seasons in to the NHL. In fact, the previous year, before joining the Vegas Golden Knights organization, in that 22-23 season with the Anaheim Ducks, he had put up 9 goals and 19 points in around 60 games for the Anaheim Ducks. So it wasn't like he, wasn't scoring goals, wasn't racking up points. He had already established himself in the NHL. So for a 24-year-old in Maxime Comtois, it was really interesting to see if the Vegas Golden Knights were going to give him a chance. And funny enough, in the preseason, he was playing top 6 minutes in several games in the preseason out there at the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, leading up to the end of roster cuts, Maxime Comtois seemed like he really could have earned a roster spot with the Vegas Golden Knights, but it wasn't until about a week before opening day in 2023-2024 the Vegas Golden Knights had announced that they had released Maxime Comtois from his PTO, and the Vegas Golden Knights did not bring him back at all. So unlike the previous 4, Maxime Comtois never played with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. But this does not mean that he did not play that season in the NHL. As after the Vegas Golden Knights did not bring back Maxime Comtois, he would sign a 1-year deal with the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Carolina Hurricanes would have him play just 1 NHL game that year before sending him down to the AHL, where he would put up some commendable numbers with, and this is funny, the Chicago Wolves. Yeah, apparently on this episode, I can't avoid the Savannah Ghost Pirates, and you can't avoid the Chicago Wolves. The Chicago Wolves, where all 3 people that we talked about on the first PTO played at, Maxime Comtois would end up playing for the Chicago Wolves after leaving the Vegas Golden Knights on a PTO. And in that season, he would play in 65 games, rack up just under 20 goals, have 45 points, and over 100 penalty minutes. Yeah, this guy was definitely someone who's very physical, a type of personality, a guy who likes to be physical in the AHL and the NHL. And when it comes to Maxime Comtois, after his 1 season playing majority in the AHL and that 1 cup of coffee in the NHL with Carolina, it was announced that he had signed with the KHL. So Maxime Comtois heading over to Russia and playing for the 2024-2025 season. So, yeah, this fifth guy, when it comes to the PTO, is really fascinating because Maxime Comtois had the most hype and the most potential of making the NHL roster out of the five that I had mentioned so far. And he is the only one of the five that I've mentioned so far that did not play with the Golden Knights organization after he gets released from his PTO. And the next member of the PTO, as we're talking about PTO history with the Vegas Golden Knights, this one is involving the Henderson Silver Knights, but an established NHLer. I will explain that in just 1 second. Now, towards the end of the 2023-2024 season, there would end up being a very interesting situation where the Vegas Golden Knights would bring in a NHLer, a guy who had played over 400 games in the NHL, and someone who had been on 5 different teams and 5 different organizations at that point, 31-year-old forward Ryan Dzingel, and he would play in about 12 games with the Henderson Silver Knights organization. Now, I am including this because it does count as a tryout, right? So when it comes to a PTO, when it comes to a tryout agreement, Ryan Dzingel being a NHLer, being someone who had played so many years out there in the NHL, 7 seasons worth in the NHL. So the Vegas Golden Knights, they bring him in for the remainder of the 2023-2024 season, and about 12 games. He actually had 4 goals and 5 points with the Henderson Silver Knights out there in the AHL, but he was more or less a veteran presence the Golden Knights brought into the minors out there in the AHL. But very interesting how Ryan Dzingel, who had actually been on a PTO with the Arizona Coyotes in the preseason, they did not sign him. They did not bring him back, and he signs that tryout with the Vegas Golden Knights, and he did play 12 games with them. Now, as of this recording, Ryan Dzingel has not signed for the 24-25 season, so it looks like maybe his career at 32 years old is going to be coming to an end. And now we get into the present day, and we're talking about Tanner Pearson. Now, Tanner Pearson, who was a first-round pick by the LA Kings in the 2012 NHL draft. Now, this is a player who has spent a bunch of years in the NHL. He has accumulated well over a lot of games out there in the NHL, and he has signed a PTO with the Vegas Golden Knights. And considering what the history has been, all right, considering that Gervais only played in the AHL, Vaughn only played in the AHL, Morrison only played in the AHL, Rydell only played in the ECHL, Comtois only played in preseason before getting cut and released from his PTO around preseason at the end of the final cuts, and Ryan Dzingel only played in the AHL. It is going to make a very safe case that if Tanner Pearson does do what is expected, and that is to be an everyday starter for the Vegas Golden Knights, that he earns a contract, off that PTO, and he plays on the bottom 6 for Vegas, it's going to be a very safe bet that Tanner Pearson will be the best PTO in Vegas Golden Knights history. I mean, granted, like I said, all he has to do is play a regular season game for the Vegas Golden Knights, and he'll end up eclipsing all of the 6 previous examples of a PTO for the Vegas Golden Knights. But overall, with Tanner Pearson, this is going to be a bottom 6 forward, someone who's going to score the occasional goal here and there, but he is someone who is a veteran who brings stability onto a bottom 6. He's done it in Los Angeles, done it in Vancouver. He's done it in a bunch of other organizations, Montreal, I believe. So with Tanner Pearson, him being a PTO, this is the 7th and final player that has been signed to a PTO with the Vegas Golden Knights. And until next time, this is Vegas Hockey Hub. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. We're going to try to upload every single day onto our YouTube channel and onto PR Connections Radio. So until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. And until next time, Go, Knights, go. Have a good one.
PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.